Hello, Bruins. I'm Angela Scales, the Senior Director of Bruin Connections at the UCLA Alumni Association. Tonight's event marks our 6th Bruin Career Insights, a YouTube live series where we explore career and professional development topics. Tonight, we're going to focus on the job interview, specifically how to prepare for this ever-important interaction and leave your future bosses with a great first impression. By now, we hope you also know about UCLA One, our online platform for professional development and networking. Continue to use it as you take the next step in your career, or if you're looking to share your experience with fellow Bruins. Check out the job postings and share your professional achievements. For those who aren't familiar with the site, it's very easy, just uclaone.com. There should be a live chat function in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Send us any questions you have throughout the session, and we will answer as many as possible. We always love hearing your feedback and suggestions for upcoming topics. So let us know what you think, because we can't do these events without your ideas. Send us an email at careerprograms@alumni.ucla.edu. Also, a quick thank you to our Blue, Gold, and Life members for continuing to make events like this possible. Your generous contributions and support allow us to provide career programming and resources for all Bruins. If you'd like to upgrade your membership, you'll see a link in the live chat function. And now let's meet Brett Fisher. Brett graduated from UCLA in 2000 with a degree in music. He's a management consultant and an executive recruiter born and raised here in Los Angeles. Long before Brett was interviewing candidates for his clients, he actually auditioned musicians and performers for live theatrical productions. So Brett, let's get us started by telling us a little bit about your background and what led you to create an executive search firm.
Great. So thank you so much for reaching out to have me speak about this topic today. This is something which I am completely passionate about, having done it on the creative side, working in 2 different nonprofit organizations. And I basically fell into consulting right around 2008. There wasn't enough work to do on the consulting for nonprofits, so I was introduced into executive search. And during that time, I actually was placed by a recruitment firm into an organization for a short period of time. And it was kind of a miserable experience working with that agency. So I would say from the pain of working with kind of a large firm, I really wanted to do something more on the boutique side, which had a very high level of personal service. And also I could bring the creative side of what I did previously into the search and interview function. So above all, I'm really, really passionate about connecting people with amazing opportunities. And then finally, like I said, the topic of interviewing can be a little bit mystical, but having been through like thousands of interviews, coaching candidates, hearing the debrief afterwards, it really boils down to a couple really key things that we'll share today. And it's really my favorite topic in the whole entire recruitment life cycle.
Love it. Well, so let's start with the day before the actual interview. What are those critical elements in terms of preparation?
So first off, I would say you need to know your intention for the interview. And I think everyone's like, oh, well, I want to get the job. But for some people, maybe they're interviewing for the first time in a long time. So their intention is going to be, just to kind of get out there and start to work on their script, start to feel what it's like to interview again. And we often, I'm sure every recruiter uses the dating analogy when it comes to interviewing. It's very similar to dating. It always gets a laugh, but you need to kind of go on a bunch of dates to see what you like in terms of a new employer. So the first thing is be clear about your intention. If your intention is, this is the company that I'm going to see myself at for the next 2 or 3 years, then you're going to want to prepare as if your life depended on it. So number 2 would be really start preparation early. I had one candidate who I placed who literally started a week beforehand and spent like 2 hours every night. And his intention was like, I am going to get this job. Like, this is something which I've been preparing for my entire career. He downloaded financial statements. He researched everyone he was going to be speaking to. He researched the direction of the company, the market they were in, and he literally prepared for this. Like, it was the most important thing. And it turned out like he got the job, and it was all due to that preparation. So preparation in all those areas. And then finally, really just preparing yourself so you can speak articulately about accomplishments, and if it comes up, failures and weaknesses. But really, to answer your question, it's really all in the preparation. So when you go in there, you're ready to go and you're ready to hit a home run with that one shot.
So then as you're arriving for the interview, we realize that everyone that you interact with could potentially provide feedback about you. So are there any major do's or don'ts when it comes to your arrival and greeting the interviewer?
So as a part of your preparation, you definitely want to know where you're going, where you're going to park, how long it takes to get from the parking to where you're going to be meeting. And so really have that down, because you don't want to be late. Above everything, never be late. I always tell candidates to get there 15 minutes early. They can sit in their car, and then like 5 minutes before their scheduled interview time, go up and then, like enter the reception, 5 or 3 minutes beforehand. So definitely want to get that out of the way. That's really easy to do correctly. Give a good firm handshake, always smile, and really make it like a genuine connection. Because everyone is going to be evaluating you, whether you realize it or not. They're going to ask and find out information what the interaction was. Very easy things that you can avoid is don't wear any perfume. Don't ever argue. Some people argue because they're like, I'm right. And don't speak negatively about your current employer or previous employers, because that always leaves kind of a distasteful thought in your future employer's mind.
Definitely. So we often hear that it's really important to be memorable, but that can also be a little bit of a tricky balance. So how do you ensure that you're memorable, but in a positive light?
All right. So yes, so being memorable is a really key element. I would say, and we're going to talk about this more further, is just being very authentic, and maybe even being a little bit vulnerable, like opening up. We come back to the dating analogy. You have a very short period of time to really get to the decision. Is this an employer that you want to be with? And do they want to hire you? I would say the average time that the two spend together is around 3 hours and 45 minutes if you add in all the interviews and all the due diligence. And so I would, being authentic and opening up and really, just being personable, I think will allow the employer to see, wow, okay, this person, they have some personality. I think maybe I'd enjoy hanging out with them outside of work. And those things I think are really important. Finally, I think having a genuine interest in the company is going to be a big deal. And if they sense that you're really up for supporting their mission and helping them grow, they're going to love that. A lot of times candidates will come in and they'll say things, and I hear it on the phone when I do my phone screen. They'll say, I want this, I want this, I want this. Yes, that is really important. You want to make sure that those things are satisfied. But when you're in the interview, you really need to frame it as, I'm here for you. I'm here to advance your mission.
So you hit on that buzzword of authentic, which we hear about so much in terms of the interview process. Why is it important to be authentic, and are there any tips for how to kind of determine where that line is of being authentic but not oversharing in an interview?
Right. So the interview process, in a sense, is all about risk reduction. We have these 3 hours and 45 minutes, and we need to find out as much as we can about each other, and then make a decision if we're going to spend the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years together. So I think it's a balance between, like I said, that authenticity, opening up, being a little bit vulnerable, being very honest. I would say, employers can really tell when you're giving quote unquote interview answers. I mean, they sound rehearsed, they sound polished, and it's like, is that really the truth? I mean, they can really tell, right? So it doesn't cost you anything to be honest about really what it is that you're looking for, because in the end, you're trying to find a great match. And then interviewing is really like that 3 hours is forecasting the future. So what it is that you say is giving them a window into what you're going to be like in the full-time role. So I would balance the authenticity, and we'll get into this probably a little bit in the next question, but also balancing extremely detailed answers that showcase your skills, experience, and finally competencies. So that balance, I think, really will help them see what you are as a person, but also get that evidence that you have the capabilities of performing in the job in a nice, concise way.
Exactly. So I know the number one topic that I hear about in our office around the hiring process is, quote, fit. So
Yep.
as a hiring manager, I know that it's important to feel like I can work with this team member, and you know that we can be candid in the interview, but that we're really looking for that fit. So how do you convey that you would be, and how can you kind of figure out if you would be a fit for the organization?
Okay, so this is probably the best question you can ask. I'm really glad you asked it, because the number one reason why it's not going to work out between two parties tends to be fit, culture fit. I would say 75% of the reasons why, 3 to 6 months down the road, they break up. They didn't assess things properly to find that fit. So I really hope employers are thinking about fit in two different ways. There's role fit, and then there's also organizational fit. So let's talk about the first one for a second. Role fit. So the candidate will have a job description. Typically, it's kind of boilerplate, but hopefully, if the employer is thinking about things properly, they'll identify competencies which they're seeking in the role. So these competencies can be in like various categories, but essentially there are these transferable skills that you have, that you walk in with on the first day, and they're really not going to change between day one and day 180. So if the employers thought about this, they'll list things like analytical, problem solver, detail orientation, judgment, things like that. And if you can get those, what you'll want to do is then the candidate, the candidate will be able to tell small stories around those specific skill sets. So another way to illustrate this is like the iceberg analogy. So you see the iceberg above the waterline, so like that's the resume. And then below the waterline are all these things about the candidate, which we're dying to know, but we don't know because we have to bring them in and we have to interview them. And so if you're showing your future employer these transferable skills, detail orientation, judgment, all these things, it reduces the risk in their mind that you'll be able to perform the job in the role. So those are the things to address. So if you don't know the competencies going into the interview, it's a great question to ask. It shows your sophistication. It shows that you as a candidate are thinking about these things. And then when they tell you, oh yeah, our ideal candidate will have judgment, detail orientation, all these things, and you speak to that very specifically about how you've solved problems in those areas, they're going to feel a lot more comfortable. So the other area is organizational fit. And this is really outside of your kind of desk job. It's just fitting into the whole entire ecosystem. And so we have a client who we work with, and they're very big on culture lunches. So they'll do like a first round with the hiring manager, maybe a second round with the CEO and a couple of other people. Almost like kind of like a 360 interview. And then if they really like the person, they'll bring them back for a third time in like a culture lunch, and they'll take the person off site. They'll go have like, beer and tacos or something like super casual and informal. And they'll really get a sense of what this person really is like in a very informal setting. They'll still be evaluating them, but they'll get a sense of, like, are they too casual with their language? Are they, professional outside the office? They'll also get a sense of, what they're like in an informal setting. So it's also a way for you to get to know your coworkers before you even start to work with this potential team that you're going to be on. So that's another way to assess organizational fit. And remember, these interviews are two ways. So you as the candidate, make sure you have a list of questions that you can ask. What have your most successful candidates that you've hired looked like? Where have they come from? What do people love about this organization? I mean, certainly you can do your due diligence on Glassdoor, and that's kind of like one data point. But in the live format, that's really where you can find out more about that organizational fit. And of course, the more information you get, like some people really like to hire quickly. There's an upside and a downside to that. But if you think about the dating analogy, like the more data points you have to make this decision, the easier it will be, because you'll have like a lot of conversations to go off of.
That is excellent advice. And I love the iceberg analogy. That's fantastic. So what is your worst or your funniest interview story, either from your own experience or maybe you've heard from a colleague, just to share with our viewers?
All right, so I've been talking to you about preparation, authenticity, all these really important things. And I did have a candidate go out for an interview, and he calls me like 20 minutes after the interview, and he's like, I got the job. And I was like, this is impossible. This is never going to work. You know, it kind of goes against everything we've talked about, right? And I'm like, I just have to trust that this is going to work. You know, me, I'm more of like a tester. That's my hiring style. Like, I'm always evaluating, and I'm like, how can they possibly know after 20 minutes? But he's still there. He's as a controller who we placed back in 2013, I think, 2013 or 2014. And he had like a 20-minute interview, and the guy's like, we love you. Can you start in 2 weeks? I'm like, how? This is not even possible. So that's the only time that's ever happened. And I was like, not cashing our check until like I knew the guarantee period passed, but it worked, and for whatever reason it clicked. And not to say it's going to happen like that, but you just never know with these things. And so anything can happen, and it was kind of a funny story.
Just like the dating analogy, anything can happen. So you delved a little bit into this in your last answer, but at the end of the interview, typically a candidate would be asked if they have any questions. So what do you advise asking, and is there anything that you really should steer away from asking?
Okay, so number one, you are preparing for this interview as it's the most important thing, right? So you're spent hours preparing. You should have your list of questions. And I would look at, you can ask questions about the job, about the company, about the people, and of course about the industry that this opportunity is in. Have your questions in order of importance, because the clock is ticking. And so let's say you have a 45-minute interview, always keep your eye on the clock, and then have that list of questions ready to go, so that you can make sure that you feel comfortable, basically, knowing what you're potentially getting into.
So kind of on that topic, are there any other essential elements to think about when you're closing the interview, or if you're kind of sensing that it's coming to an end, anything to keep top of mind to really make sure that you convey before it ends?
Yes. So great question. And for that, I have an emoji, because I love these things. So this is probably a key question. The close, right? So you're sensing the end, and you're going to ask your future employer, do you have any concerns about my ability to do this job? It's really the catch-all at the very end. For whatever reason, if you weren't able to articulate something and they forgot to ask, it's really that last ditch effort for them to come clean about any concerns. So they may say, yes, there's a couple things that come to mind. Say, great, what are they? And like, make sure that they tell you everything, because if this is your one shot, you want to make sure it's all addressed in that one meeting. And when they bring it up, say, great, I could see how you see that, maybe I don't have enough skills with Excel. Well, let me tell you, my experience. And then maybe it wasn't on the resume, or maybe it's something which you didn't think was important enough and you left off the resume. So, point to something, a very specific example where you do address that concern. Make sure it's, above all, it's truthful. And on that note, if there's any area of the job description which you don't have experience in, be honest about it. Don't ever try to create experience that you don't have, because it's going to come up if you inevitably get hired. Instead, you could say, I've had exposure to using certain functions in Excel, but based on my experience learning this software program over here, I could probably get up to speed pretty quickly. I could probably take night classes, and offer up a solution. And they'll hire you because of the experience that you bring. So don't dwell on something if you don't have that experience. Just highlight the stuff you do have, because when they evaluate you as a whole, they'll take everything into consideration.
That's great advice. I love how you reframed the question to, as you said, be solution oriented. So the interview has been completed, and you're moving forward. And we've all heard about how important it is to send a thank you card or an email, and that's a really crucial step in the process. What would you say is really the ideal time frame for those post-interview tasks?
Okay, so I like same day thank yous. So let's just talk really quickly logistically. When you walk in, make sure you do have a nice folder. You'll have the job description, which you can highlight. You can circle things. You'll have your notes. You can definitely take notes. You'll have your questions. So make sure when you have all that stuff, you ask for business cards. Sometimes they may say, oh, I don't have it, but you can, get the email address from the reception. You get your business card, you get the email address. I prefer same day because the quicker you respond, the quicker it shows your genuine enthusiasm. Obviously, if you realize it's not a fit, then, I would say no later than 24 hours after the interview start time. So same day, but no later than 24 hours.
Okay, that's great advice. So before we move into the live chat questions, a couple of really wonderful questions we received in our RSVPs. One of them came from Rolando, and he said, how do you walk the line between competence and arrogance?
Okay, Rolando. I don't know if I would walk into an interview being arrogant. It's a tough one. What you do want to do though is be confident and have very specific examples about your experience. The arrogance can come across as being a little bit too assured, and depending on the office culture, they may not feel that it fits in. But one important thing I can point to, which we haven't talked about yet, is the detail of your answers. And we have an acronym. So SAR, and if you haven't heard it, so situation, the situation you were in, the action you took specifically, and R, the results, what actually resulted from your inputs. You can additionally add what you learned from that experience, and then maybe how you've applied it since. And those specific details, talking about something in a previous work situation, will give the interviewer confidence that you actually do have the experience to back up the job that you're trying to pursue.
Definitely. So another really interesting question we got from Caroline. She said, I'm generally a warm and friendly person, but as a result, I can come across as too casual. How do I balance my natural propensity to be familiar with someone without behaving in an informal or relaxed way that could be seen as inappropriate for what should feel like a formal interview?
Okay, so first of all, Caroline, great question. It's good that you're aware that you're doing this, because then you can actually take steps to make sure you balance it. So to what we talked about earlier, it's good to open up and to be authentic so they can really see who you are. But you want to make sure that in your limited amount of time, you're addressing the experience that you have to showcase. So, do that for a couple minutes, build some rapport. That's really good. But then come back to the job and why you're qualified for it. So we talked about intention of the interview as one goal at the beginning. Second being, in a very short amount of time, you need to sell your experience and your abilities and to be likable. And if you have a limited amount of time to sell your experience, you want to make sure that you can talk about accomplishments and things that you've done. So just be aware of the time. And just have a nice balance of the informal and the being sure that you sell yourself so that you don't sell yourself short and lose out on the time when it comes to the end of the interview.
Right. So one of the questions very popular in the RSVPs was, how do you address that strengths and weaknesses question?
Okay. So strengths, that's definitely going to come up, and use the format, the SARL, the situation, the action, the result, and what you've learned. To talk about specifically. Several times I've debriefed my clients and they're like, wow, he was really great, but he or she never really got down from like 30,000 feet. They were just very general. That's not how you want to go through an interview. You want to be very, very specific about things that you've done, because that's the value add you're going to bring to your future employer. Now, the weaknesses question is, I really hope employers ask this, because it's important for them to see what happens when something doesn't go right. It's inevitable that something's not going to go right. So we actually have a series, an interview coaching series that we do for our clients. And this is one of the questions that we always encourage them to ask. And so being prepared to answer weaknesses questions is going to give you a leg up over everyone else. So let's take a weakness. Maybe you're so detail oriented. You spend too much time, let's say, proofreading something, and then you just don't get onto other things. Okay, so maybe it happens. The way to address it is to talk about a situation where it did happen and really what you've learned from that experience. And then with the passing of time, now 6 months later, I have this routine, I have something set up or a structure in place that keeps me moving forward, so I don't spend too much time in getting bogged down in all the details. So everyone has weaknesses, and the fact that you can take responsibility for your weaknesses and show your future employer how you think through solving that problem will really go a long way. So be prepared to answer that.
I love that. I've actually noticed in some interviews that I've sat in on that people often try to turn it into a positive, I'm a perfectionist, so this. Do you suggest steering away from that and really just honestly sharing something that's a weakness, because otherwise it might reflect that you're not willing to admit there's things you could improve on?
So everyone has weaknesses. It's just, I did the Strengths Finder last week, and like my bottom strengths are my weaknesses. It's important to address. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get the job. It just kind of gets everything out in the open so your future employer knows how to work with this type of person. I mean, people are so complex. There's so many different dimensions, and even though they think they're going to get the perfect candidate, there's still going to be weaknesses. And so it's just inevitable. And from an employer perspective, being able to address weaknesses in an interview setting, it's so much easier than hiring someone and then realizing the weaknesses down the road and then trying to coach them on it, and then the candidate not being able to take responsibility for the weakness, and then you're stuck in a very awkward situation. So definitely address them as opportunities and ways that you've worked through them, and how you're different now because of it, and how you're dealing with it.
That's such a great point. The other really popular question was around salary. So how do you address salary questions, and is it appropriate to ever bring up salary questions during the interview?
So good question. Look up, for everyone watching, look up bolstering range in a salary negotiation. This is probably the best topic that I've come across. And essentially the bolstering range in a negotiation has to do with, and when it's appropriate. So I would say don't bring it up unless really it's time to bring it up. And when they do bring it up, that's always a good sign, because it's like, okay, I've liked what I've heard. Now what's this going to cost me? Or what's it going to take to get this person to come over to this opportunity? So it's a good sign. If they do ask where you are, I always say be honest, especially for our higher level candidates that we place. They're going to do salary verification. So you don't want to say something and then they do the due diligence and salary verification, and then there's disparity, and it's just, the whole thing will be a complete waste of time. So be honest. The employer is not going to want to overpay, but they will pay a reasonable premium for someone to take the risk of coming over, to the new opportunity. So let's talk about bolstering range for a second. So let's say you're seeking a salary of, let's say, $100,000 per year. No matter what, that's a number you'd be happy with. I'm just using it as a round number. So in your negotiation, the bolstering range would say, you would tell your future employer, I'm looking for something probably like 105 to 115. Like, that's the range I'd feel comfortable with. So basically you're guarding your floor number, and they're most likely going to give you something above the lowest number that you gave them, but you gave them a range. So they'll give you like 106 or 107, but you're good because you would have taken 100. So just something above your lowest number and then all the way up. So look it up. There's a lot of articles written a couple of years ago. I think Columbia University did a study about this, and it really got a lot of attention.
That is so helpful and so actionable. So one of the questions from our live chat came from Anna Lee, and she says, thanks, Brett. What tips do you have for someone who's trying to make a career transition into a new industry?
Okay. So this comes up all the time, because we're in our job and we're like, you know what, it's time. So let's get back to those competencies, because that is what you're going to draw on when you pivot from either one industry to another or from one function to another. So I think a question came through during the week, like going from project management to being an executive assistant. So clearly they're two different functions. One is, they're both highly detail oriented, right? So in project management, you have all these like milestones. You have to make sure there's dependencies and stuff. And then you go to executive assistant, and you have to make sure like all the travel stuff is booked and everything, which is like highly, highly detail oriented. So I would refer to those transferable skills as detail orientation. For example, you'll talk about a specific situation where without your detail orientation, the whole thing would have like crumbled. So you can look through maybe, 4 or 5 competencies that are transferable between job X and job Y, and then just come up with those mini stories which have a great hook and a disastrous ending if it weren't for the fact that you jumped in there and came up with a process and they're like, whoa, I really want to hire you. This sounds great. So focus on the competencies and the transferable skills to get you from one to the next.
That is excellent. Another question that we receive, I know it comes up in our office because we mostly do panel interviews, but what would be your tips for someone being interviewed by more than one person? Okay,
so this comes up from time to time. The most important thing is to be sure your answers are consistent, because they're going to go back and talk and they're going to say, oh, well, so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that. So just make sure, even if like a week goes by and you forget what you said in interview 1 and interview 2, it's got to be consistent. Otherwise, they'll think that you're going back and forth. I'm really hoping if employers do this and they separate the interviews, it's because one interviewer is covering the technical skills, one interviewer is covering the culture fit, and maybe one interviewer is covering something else. So hopefully there isn't a repetition of questions. But again, with each one, make sure you're memorable, make sure you have specific stories and specific examples that you can address, and try to connect with each person. One thing we haven't talked about is when you're preparing for the interview, make sure you're doing your research on LinkedIn, social media, finding out where these people went to school, what they're passionate about. And then when you're opening up in the very first part of the interview, you say, oh yeah, I saw you went to this school, or go Bruins, or whatever it is. That way you're starting out on some sort of common ground. There's already a little bit of likability factor happening. Now they want to hear more about you.
So in thinking about what you just mentioned with doing that kind of prep work, is there kind of a line though to make sure that you don't sound creepy, like you know too much about them? I see what you're saying, throwing in a line, but is there kind of a balance to keep in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I would keep it to maybe like 10% of the interview, enough to make yourself knowledgeable, so you don't. We were at a client site last week, and she was lamenting to us about other recruiters who sent candidates in, and like they didn't even know like what job they were applying for. Like they didn't even know about the company or the business model or where they were going. Like there's definitely a fundamental amount of research that you want to do to sound informed and to sound like you really do want to pursue this company. Because if you really were, then you would do research. So I'm saying like 10%. And then make sure you spend the rest of the time selling yourself and your specific competencies that you're great at. Okay,
that's great. A neat question we received was, are there preferred colors to wear when you're going for an interview?
No specific colors, but I would say, whatever looks most flattering. You don't want like a bright, you don't want something which is bright and then will detract. Whatever, you have one shot. Like you've prepared your whole career, you've amassed all this experience, and now in 60 minutes, you're going to get up to the plate and you're going to impress your future employer. So don't do anything that would potentially detract them from their decision-making process. One point to make is be sure you research the style, or what, like you definitely don't want to underdress, but if it's somewhere like Silicon Beach, like they're very cool with like jeans and a blazer and a collared shirt. Sometimes they say like, oh yeah, don't even worry about the blazer, but let them tell you to dress down. Always go dressing up a little higher than what you think it would be, but make sure it's, go with something that makes you feel really comfortable. And flatters you, and you just feel very confident. Like I'm sure people have like their go-to outfit. So I would say stick with that, and then that will make you feel really great on your interview day.
That is spot on. So we got a great question from William. He said, as someone who hasn't interviewed for quite some time, I was wondering if there were any significant changes in the last few years in the process, or pieces of advice kind of getting back into that interview mode.
All right, getting back into interview mode, practice. If you have friends you can practice with, give them the questions, have them ask you the questions. Practice giving your specific examples, action, result, and learnings. Those are key. I would say what's changed is really around these competencies. And before I was like, we're looking for 3 to 10 years of experience. We need this accounting degree. Those are all great. but it doesn't mean that someone is guaranteed to be able to do the job. So now there's this shift to behavioral competency-based interviewing where they're looking for display and evidence of those competencies, detail, orientation, judgment. So that is what to look out for.
So kind of leading into that in terms of getting back in that mode, we got a great question around resume format and thinking about, getting and securing that interview. Do you have an opinion on what resume format is best and, kind of guiding people to best secure the interview?
Okay, so with the resumes, I always tell candidates, these are the conversation starters that will open the door to get the interview. So whatever's on the resume, first of all, we don't have very much time to look at the resume, maybe 15 to 30 seconds. And so you want the most important accomplishments to be your top 3 bullets. Everything below that, if I read what I want to hear in the first 3 bullets, forget it. It's bring them in, let's talk to them. We want to make sure that they're a fit. So I would say I'm a big fan of the one-page resume. It's very focused. There's no distraction. I would make sure that the bullets on the resume correlate specifically to the responsibilities that they're looking for in the job, because they really do need those people to do that. So if you do have it and it's buried like bullet 7 or 8, there's a good chance that they'll miss it. And if you have one shot for your resume to be read, you want to take the time to make sure that your resume is completely aligned with the job that you're applying for and that those bullets are at the top. For some people, they have a career of experience and 2 pages make sense. I would definitely just focus on the past 10 years, utilize the real estate on the page appropriately. You can show previous or earlier career experience on page 2, but really it is literally the first 3 to 5 bullets under each job that will get you the interview. Then in the interview, that's where you really open up and go into a lot more detail.
That is so wise. Another great question we got from Suzanne was, what's the best answer to that why question of, why do you want to work for this company or have this job?
All right. So if you have a specific story around your passion for that company, that's your time to bring it up. So for me, I am extremely passionate about connecting great talent with great opportunities. I've always been a connector. Started early on working in live theater, connecting musicians to opportunities, actors to opportunities. And so that's my why. I get very charged up by helping people and connecting people. And so your personal story around the company and the opportunity will come out through that question. And again, I would be as authentic as possible. If you find yourself not aligning with the company, then maybe cancel the interview. But you really want to have a connected answer so that you're in alignment with the purpose of the organization.
And on that note, a last question that we received I thought was particularly relevant was asking, how do you prepare that introduction when they say, tell me about yourself? How do you prepare for that? And is there kind of a time limit that you should stick to when you get that question?
Yeah, I would say so it's the opener, right? So come back to a story. When we opened today, I talked about an experience I had with a recruiting firm, which was unpleasant. I talked about taking that experience and wanting to build a process that was a lot more creative, a higher personal touch. I'm really being able to infuse my creativity and then connecting people in the end. So you have 1 to 2 minutes around your purpose or your vision and what you're here to accomplish. And so, yeah, I would say take 1 to 2 minutes, focus in on why you're here, your passion, maybe one specific story about what really makes you you, and hook them, right in the beginning with that powerful story. So that will really set the tone for them probing. They want to know more. Great, tell me more about you, and that's always a good thing.
That's fantastic advice. So Brett, as we wrap up, what would you say are those key nuggets for people watching, the most important things to remember in terms of prep and the interview itself?
All right. So we talked about preparation. There's really 3 key areas really of the interview. From the employer's perspective, there are these competencies. And for you, you want to make sure that you're probing questions about what it is that they're doing so you can align yourself. So make sure that those things are met. Secondly, you're giving detailed answers, make sure they give you detailed answers. Because again, you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. First, make sure you're selling them first. Make sure you're doing most of the talking at first. And then after that, then you'll probe them. And then finally, you have to keep a benchmark in mind. Okay, so they're going to be benchmarking you. They have an idea in their head of what their ideal candidate looks like, and meets expectations and a below expectation. So make sure you want to be like in that top percentile of exceeding expectations with your answers and with what you're looking for as well. So benchmark companies before you go in. So do your research and find out the types of cultures which are going to be in alignment with what you're looking for, and have that culture in mind. And then if they don't meet that benchmark, it's okay. I think some people get really caught up in the fact that this has to be the one. Like this, oh my God, everything is relying on this one interview, and this is the perfect employer. If I don't get this, I'm just going to be devastated. Like I've had candidates like that. So I walk away from any of those interviews and I always say, what happens, happens. You go in, you give it your best, and if it's meant to be, it's going to happen. If it doesn't happen, it's probably because there's something that's even more meant to be. It's going to come up in the future, and they're like, oh, okay, I guess so. But usually it kind of has, it's the way the universe kind of works itself out. And then sure enough, like 2 or 3 months down the road, they're like, oh my gosh, Brett, this perfect opportunity just came up. You'll never guess. And then finally, I would say, go on a lot of dates, like make sure you have, if it's with one employer, try to meet, 2 or 3 times to really flesh everything out. Or if you're just starting to interview again, just talk to a lot of people. If for whatever, there's going to be, so you're going to say, okay, well, how do I go on a lot of dates? So you're going to apply to jobs that you obviously want to apply for. But then you can also do something called the informational interview, where you can just reach out to someone on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm really passionate about your company. I really want to know more about how I can get in. I'm not specifically applying for anything, but if I could just take you out to coffee or speak to you on the phone for 30 minutes, it would mean so much to me. So that's the informational interview. It's a great way to practice your questions, practice your specific examples that you're going to speak about, and then get some feedback from this person about the company or even how they got there. One person always told me, like, if there's a specific role that you want, informational interview those people, and kind of reverse engineer, like, how do I get into that role? And then they'll give you all the tips and tricks on how they got into that role, and you're like, great. And then you figure out, what jobs you need to apply for to start setting yourself up for a career path in that specific role.
I love that. And actually, that's a wonderful piece that can be utilized within UCLA One. The alumni who've signed up indicate if they're available to answer questions about their industry. And so you can, message them in the platform and ask for exactly that for an informational interview. One last really wonderful question popped up while we were chatting. So Aileen asked, what's the best way to address the question of why do you want to leave your current job?
All right, so that's always going to come up. We talk about it as like the main motivation, like what is the reason for this job change? And I think it's the same reason why you have a buying decision, like you're tired of your car, there's got to be some sort of pain point, like a genuine pain point. And so if you're like, no, I'm just kind of like checking things out, forget it. They're like, they're not going to take you very seriously. If you have a genuine pain point, such as your boss is not leaving anytime soon and you're looking for growth, your commute is ridiculous, and you're looking for something closer to home, I would never, ever, 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 ever say you're leaving a job because you're looking for more money or an increase in salary. That's one thing. You always want to say, and this, I didn't say this earlier with the salary question, you always want to first say it's about the opportunity, and I'm sure if you make your best offer, I'll give you like my best consideration, and then of course, if you go into it, then you talk about the bolstering range, but you're really the number one reason is opportunity. And then specifically detail why there is a cap on opportunity, and you can say like my passion or my why or everything is about X. And at my current job, I've done as much as I can. I think they're great people. I've learned a lot, but I think it's time, and I've given as much as I can. I'm really looking for that next step and that next opportunity.
Okay, I promised last one, but another one popped in that I think is a really wonderful piece to touch on. Stephanie asked, is it okay to ask what to expect next? So I know a lot of people want to know what's the timeline for hiring. Is it all right to ask that at the end of the interview?
Yep, great question. Get a thumbs up. So that's a great way to keep the process moving forward. You could also say, where are you in the process? Are there other people in the process? Is there a next step? What can I expect? When should I hear from you? Should I follow up? Even better, like, should I follow up with you, next week? People love initiative. Like, you just can't teach initiative, right? So if you're a candidate who's following up and you're like on top of it, that's bonus points. So there's not too much that really is like taboo that you shouldn't, because again, this is all exploratory. It's dating. We want to make sure we get everything out in the open now before we commit to something and we're locked in for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So absolutely, that's actually a great question to make sure you're advancing the process.
And I love that, just showing that you're proactive and taking initiative.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Brett. Your advice and your insights have been invaluable in preparing Bruins for the interview process.
Great. Yeah, you're very welcome. This is like my favorite thing to talk about. So anyone, if you want, you feel free to reach out. I'm happy to share all these insights and further insights. And I know everyone will do a great job in their next interview. And like I said, whatever happens, happens. And, another thing that always comes up, which I'll leave you with, is like, people are nervous and I have nerves, and it's just going to be a part of it, right? So I always tell candidates, like, as you're driving to the interview, call someone, talk to a good friend or a parent or someone who is like on your team, right? And just talk to them all the way up to the front door, and so they're kind of always with you, they're right there. And you hang up the phone, but there's this other person who's your partner. They're there, they want you to win, and the employer wants you to win too. That's something which we always forget, because we're like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? But they just wanna find the person. Like, they want you to be the last person that they interview, so they don't have to go through this dating process anymore, so they want you to win. So just keep that in mind to help calm your nerves, and they're gonna love you no matter what. And if you focus in on all that experience that you've acquired for the past 5, 10 years, and you talk about those things, they're gonna love to hear it, and hopefully it'll be a fit.
I love that, the little pep talk right before you go in.
Exactly.
So to all the Bruins watching, thank you again for joining us and participating in tonight's discussion. If you missed a portion of tonight's event, or you want to share it with someone who missed it, you can find it on the UCLA Alumni YouTube channel. It'll be there immediately after we close. And to repeat what we said earlier, we want your thoughts and your suggestions about upcoming topics, and we want to bring you tailored programming, but we can't do that without your input. So send us an email at careerprograms@alumni.ucla.edu. Thank you again to Brett and to everyone for being a part of tonight's discussion. And once again, thank you to our Blue, Gold, and Life members for making events like this possible. We'll see you again on July 26th for our next episode of Bruin Career Insights, when we'll focus on the topic of micro leadership. Have a good evening, and go Bruins!